Hello and welcome to Marshall Matters with me, Winston Marshall, at the Spectator buildings in London. Today I'm joined by comedy legend, multi-BAFTA winning, creator of Father Ted, Black Books, The IT Crowd, and writer for Brass Eye, The Day to Day, The Fast Show, Graham Linehan. Graham, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
So I watched these shows growing up. This is very special for me. But what I just learned is that actually you started in music.
Yeah.
How did you get from music to comedy?
Well, I was a music journalist in a magazine called Hot Press in Dublin. And Arthur Matthews, who went on to write Ted with me, was the art layout guy. And this was a time when magazines, the way they printed the magazine was like, if you made a mistake, you had to cut out the word and post it over the copy and then photocopy it or something and send it off. So this was pre-computers. So the last weekend before publication was grindingly slow and boring. And Arthur and a man named Paul Woodfull, who we nicknamed Paul Wonderful, used to kind of carry on a comedy routine between themselves. That would just have us all in stitches, and I really kind of fell in love with Arthur especially.
What was the routine?
They had a few. One of the things they did was they pretended to be inner city Dublin taekwondo instructors, and they had a joke that when taekwondo comes from two words, two Korean words, tae meaning head or intellect, and kwando meaning to batter, and they had stuff like this. And also Paul was in a band called the Joshua Trio that Arthur drummed for. And every so often Arthur would, when Paul was doing a costume change, I think it was, Arthur would come out from behind a drum kit and put a dog collar in. And he would do this character called Father Ted. One of our favorite jokes he did was he said, if there's anyone at the back who can't see, say hello to them. They're from St. Kevin's School for the Blind. So there were all these kind of, it was not just like funny. It was like sophisticated and funny. It was really strong stuff. And I was noticing that on TV, the stuff wasn't as strong. I thought these jokes are better crafted than what we're seeing on TV. So, for me, it was not that much of a jump to ask him to come to London, which I did when Select magazine, which was the big Britpop magazine, I think you could say, brought me over to write for them. And I said to Arthur, will you come over and join us and we'll give it a go?
So he came over and you created Father Ted, the TV show.
Yeah, although we kind of, he thought he'd be over for a few months and he ended up staying 10 years. And we started off writing sketches and handing them into radio shows because we were told that radio was the way in. But then one day we were looking at Smith & Jones, Griff Rhys-Jones and Mel Smith's show. And there was a list of writers at the end and it went on for ages. And I realized, oh my God, they probably take submissions. So we sent in a few sketches to them and got called in for a meeting almost immediately. So ever since then, it's been, Griff got us our agent. We were able to hand scripts directly in, or ideas for sitcoms directly into Talkback, and then to Hat Trick, and it just took off from there. Really, we were learning as we went. We didn't know how to write a sitcom, but our first sitcom was a disaster because we would write them to be 40 minutes long, and we wouldn't cut it down. Because we were kind of digging our heels in and thinking that they're trying to take out our jokes. But then of course when it got into the edit, we had to cut it down to 29 minutes. I remember once I think I asked someone, can we ask Channel 4 just not to run ads? So that was a real lesson in humility and something I've borne in mind ever since, which is that the people who are giving you notes aren't trying to ruin your show, they're trying to help you. So when Father Ted came along, we had a great producer in Jeffrey Perkins, who had a very light touch, but would steer us towards telling stronger stories, getting funnier moments out of what we had. He had a great phrase he used to say, "I think you're missing a trick here." And I loved hearing that, because it meant that we were about to discover a whole new area of comedy that we didn't realize was there. He sadly died recently, and relatively recently. Wonderful man. Also produced The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. True English gentleman, lovely bloke. Through tutorship from someone like Jeffrey and some other brilliant producers we worked with, like Shauna William and Lissa Evans, we just learned on the job, So yeah.
And you've also, I didn't mention this earlier, now have a new side of your life, which is that you're a women's rights activist, and that has clashed with your work on Father Ted, where your Father Ted musical was axed apparently because of your controversial opinions. What was the story with the musical?
Well, my controversial opinions are not actually very controversial. They're shared by the vast majority of people in this country. That you shouldn't give kids surgical interventions and pharmaceutical interventions that might have long-lasting effects. That women don't deserve to lose their livelihoods for being feminists. That J.K. Rowling doesn't deserve to have death and rape threats sent to her. That male prisoners shouldn't be placed in the female estate. Mm-hmm. That NHS wards should be women only. Like, these are not controversial opinions. But unfortunately, we have a kind of a middle class now that is captured by all these, absurd ideas. The kind of false consensus they've created around these issues comes about through intimidation and force and cancelling and so on. Mm-hmm. So I knew that if I started talking about this, I noticed that women online were beginning to be vilified and harassed out of their jobs and all this. So I realized that if I started speaking about it more clearly and explicitly, I'd be in trouble. So I had a spot of cancer a few years ago. That was easily taken care of, but I got a nice insurance payout from it. So I said to my wife, I'm gonna start talking about this, and they're gonna come after my livelihood. So we can use this money to keep going until the TED musical happens, because I thought the TED musical would be too big to cancel, so to speak. Unfortunately, then COVID came along and extended the time we were waiting to get it done. And during that time, I was banned from Twitter for saying men aren't women. And
men aren't women, though, was the exact tweet.
Men aren't women, though. And the narrative around me began to consistently say that I was anti-trans, that I was, in fact, that's what my Wikipedia entry says. And if ever I tried to change it, it changes back within 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. So there was a kind of because up until that point, I was the biggest account on Twitter talking about this issue. It was before J.K. Rowling came into onto the scene. I was a big target,
So you knew going into it that this would be the case. You said just now, you told your wife, I'm going to get a lot of pushback for these opinions. So do you have any regrets about going into it? And did you, if you knew you had pushback, did you know to what extent it would happen?
That's the only regret I have. I didn't know they would come after my wife. I didn't know they would release her address online. And I didn't know they would that people would privately get in touch with her and tell her to tell me to stop talking. She came under a lot of pressure. If I thought about it a bit longer, I would have taken steps to protect her more. But I was eager to get into the fight because I was seeing what Mermaids were doing to young children, and the Tavistock, which is the gender identity clinic that's being closed down soon. And I thought, this is too much of an emergency to rest on our laurels. We have to fight it straight away. You know, I saw people like Kathleen Stock getting bullied, Maya Forstater losing her job. And I just thought it would be immoral to ignore all these things.
Yeah.
You know?
Where do you think that the passion to stand up against this injustice, as you've noticed it, came from?
Well, I've always, I was bullied at school. You know, I was very tall. So I would try and shrink down. It's where I've got a bit of a stoop. And I would try and hide. And my parents had this thing where they basically told me never to hit back. You know, they were my mum was this, you know, like a lot of mums in the world, terrified of anything happening to me. So I would hold back. I was very, you know, I would hold back when I was being subjected to things. And I think the kind of anger grew in me then at any kind of bullying. And I especially don't like bullying against women because, like, as a friend of mine says, Debbie Hayton, you know, the bullies, she describes trans rights activists as the bullies even the other bullies hated at school, the bullies who bully girls. And that's what they are. They are despicable cowards who pick on women. So I thought, yeah, I mean, you know, I just, it's just my number one. I just hate bullies.
Yeah. So Father Ted the musical.
Yeah.
What happened there? They were you were about to do the show. COVID happened, and then they closed it down and said no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, we did two. We got it on its feet partially twice. We did a read through with the songs. Or I think we did a read-through maybe without the songs or with just very simplified versions of the songs. And then we did another read-through where we choreographed how the songs might look and so on and played that to some of the people involved. And they both went great. The show feels ready to go. Perhaps a little bit of rewriting is needed, but not much. And yeah, but unfortunately, throughout all this period, I kept getting intermittent demands to stop talking about the issue. But again, we're talking about the health of children.
Demands from who?
The producers, my colleagues. One of my colleagues actually rang my wife and put pressure on her to tell her to stop. You know, it's
surely that's a line that unacceptable to cross.
The person involved, which I was thinking of naming him, but the person involved still hasn't apologized. You know, he put pressure on my marriage when we were under a huge amount of pressure already, because trans rights activists had targeted my wife and myself, and were doing everything they could to keep me quiet. So for him to join in that is pretty low, I think. But yeah, so this happened, and eventually I was so frustrated by all this. I've actually queued up the letter I wrote. I wrote this letter to Hat-Trick, who were the producers of Father Ted, and Sonia Friedman. Jimmy Mulville is Hat-Trick, and Sonia Friedman of Sonia Friedman Productions is like one of the biggest producers in the West End, and author, and Neil Hannon as well. And I said basically, I'm living under a bit of a cloud when I don't think you all have my back as collaborators or as business partners or as friends. Far from being on the wrong side of history, J.K. Rowling and I have been proved right over and over again. This is a poisonous ideology that is destroying lives, and both sides are not to blame for the toxicity. I said, Sonia, you know how J.K., because Sonia is a friend of J.K. Rowling's. I said, Sonia, you know how J.K. Rowling has suffered and how her heart must break every day. And I finished by saying, stop telling me to stop standing up for her and my daughter. My daughter is not a cervix haver. She is a woman and she is my daughter. Don't anyone dare use Ted as leverage to make me abandon my daughter, or I will simply take it elsewhere. That might have been a little strong, I guess. So at the end, I basically just said, I'm sorry to have to put it in such strong terms, but these people are monsters and everyone needs to start standing up to them. I can't force you to be brave, but I can ask you to stop adding to the pressure that is currently on me. I will not abandon my daughter. And then I got a call from Jimmy Mulville saying, come to London for a meeting. And at the meeting, he told me they didn't want me involved with the musical. Wow. And they offered me £200,000 to walk away from it.
I mean, when you talk about your daughter like that, earlier in the conversation, you say you want to stand up to bullies, but also the love of a father for his daughter, to protect his daughter, that surely would resonate with everyone.
It's such a strange... I just don't understand it. Like, I remember I said to Jimmy Mulville, what have I said that you disagree with? And he rolled his eyes. I still don't know. I still don't know what they disagree with.
Yeah.
You know? And I just don't understand how... And there are other colleagues on the show who have wives and who have daughters. And I just don't understand how they can't be fighting this stuff. This is the most pernicious, anti-female, misogynistic movement I've ever seen.
Well, I look back at your career in activism. You were in Ireland, you were fighting to repeal the eighth, so i.e. a pro-choice position, which came into law in 2018. And it seems to me from a progressive point of view, there is a consistency in you standing for women then, and then again now standing for women in the trans debate. Why do you think it is that so many other progressives, perhaps most other progressives, have taken a different course against women and children and for trans rights?
Well, I would edit that slightly simply by saying that it's not so much against trans rights, it's against a version of trans rights that is directly opposed to women's rights. I'm friends. One of the ironies of this whole thing is that I'm friends with more trans people than the people calling me transphobic, and they are, distraught at what's been happening supposedly in their name. You know, Debbie Hayton is a good example. Miranda Yardley is another one. They both find this as insane as I do, but their voices are ignored because this is an ideological battle. It's not an ethical battle. This is a battle of ideas, and if you have the wrong idea at the time, at this particular time, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can call it cancel culture, although that sometimes seems like not quite the right phrase. But everyone is frightened. Everyone would rather it go away, which is why they offered me so much money to go away from TED.
Did you take the money?
No, I considered it for a while, and I even started working on a statement with Jimmy Mulville. That protected me and made things not seem so, I don't know, like I was being punished for something. But then one day I was listening to an interview with a teammate of Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas is the hulking man who is cheating at women's swimming and was on a team with these young women. And the mother of one of the teammates was being interviewed, and she burst into tears because she was recounting how her daughter said, "I don't know what I can do if he comes in when I'm changing." And this mother said, I was crying because she said, "I'm crying because it's 2022 and I have to tell my daughter that she has every right to privacy." And she literally doesn't know she has that right. And this woman was in tears, and I just thought, I'm not going to agree to anything. This is monstrous what's happening to women. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take the money. And I genuinely thought they'd go, okay, we were a bit silly. Let's get it back on the road, because the show is so good and so perfect and so nearly there. But no, apparently they'll only make the show if I die or something.
They didn't actually say that.
No, but do you know what I mean? What else are they waiting for?
What can you take us into the world of production comedy? Are these people... are they scared of the controversy that they'll get in the press, or do they believe the ideology? Do they believe you're wrong? Or do they, Jimmy, where do they stand on it, do you think? It's hard to speculate, but if we can speculate.
Oh, I think I know what's happening. I mean, I spoke to Jimmy a few times, and both Jimmy and Sonia shared what have become thought-terminating cliches that are fed to people so that they say the correct thing. Jimmy said there's bad behavior on both sides of the argument, which is not true. I asked him to name some bad behavior from our side, and he couldn't. And Sonia Friedman said I was on the wrong side of history.
You were?
Yeah. So these are just cliches trotted out by trans rights activists because they don't have any arguments. They don't actually have any arguments.
Or that they've perhaps not really looked into it very much. They don't particularly care about the issue and
exactly.
Say trotting along with it.
I mean, the J.K. Rowling being a bigot is accepted by like millions of people, and yet there's not a shred of evidence of this bigotry. You know, so it's basically just fear of young people, fear of the young people in their companies, fear of their own kids, who I think have them held hostage a lot of the time with these opinions.
What do you mean by that?
I think kids are telling their parents the usual kind of, things like the debunked suicide statistics, the debunked statistics about the safety of puberty blockers. None of these things stand up, but the lines of argument are very, very, they endure no matter what. Again, J.K. Rowling, the fact that she's toxic, it's enduring despite all evidence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they're just kind of in this middle class bubble of people who believe this fashionable evil ideology.
I think support your argument that against the idea that there are bad people on both sides. If you look at the debate and who's actually suffering consequences for their opinions, and I've had a lot of these guests on the show. As I've already mentioned James Dreyfus, and we've talked about J.K. Rowling, who people say, oh, she's not cancelled, she can still speak. Well, actually, she's still having professional repercussions for her opinions, not to mention the bigotry and the death threat she's endlessly receiving. But also on this show, I've had Rosie Kay, who had to forced to resign from her dance company for having gender critical opinions. I've on a separate event spoken to Jester Wells, who in art was forced to, I think it's the Royal Academy, where she was had her work taken down and fortunately reinstated. And in music, and where industry I come from, Craig Potter of Elbow was wiped from social media for being supportive of children and worrying about, I think it was Mermaids. Christian Henson as well at Spitfire Music. He co-founded Spitfire Music and was forced to he was suspended from that. So it seems to me that it's the gender critical people who are standing up for women's rights who are being punished for their opinions. And on the other side, I don't see the punishment as much.
No, there's no punishment, and there's no. But the punishment makes you think there must have been a crime, but there has been no crime. And also the other thing about cancel culture is that it's not just artists that are being affected. There's a social worker who's being subjected to. Her name is Rachel Mead, being subjected to endless investigations because she shared one of my blogs. The guy from Spitfire actually was in trouble for sharing something I said. Huh. I've known police women who were fired from a detective who was fired from her job. I know a woman who lost her chance to be a foster carer because she said she wouldn't transition a child. It's affecting people at every level of society. Yeah. So it's not like a kind of, that's the thing about when people say cancel culture, they immediately think of people like Rowling and people like myself, but it's affecting everyone. Yeah. And it's affecting ordinary people worst of all, because, Rachel Mead, she's not a billionaire. So she can't fight with as much gusto and bravery as Rowling. She's much more exposed and much more vulnerable to, as I say, this ideology that's just kind of swept through the middle class like a forest fire,
Well, if we could stick to comedy just for a little bit more, because another noticeable cancellation was the scene from the IT crowd that was removed from Channel 4 in 2020, where one of the characters falls in love with a trans woman, if that's correct.
It was actually a whole episode.
A whole episode?
They've taken the whole episode offline, yeah.
Okay, so what happened there?
They just wrote to me and they said they wrote a letter that was full of Stonewall talking points, none of which are true. Uh-huh. The idea that trans people are under some sort of violent threat all the time, it's a lie. It's based on nothing. It's actually based on the murder rates of Brazilian trans-identified prostitutes, where it's not the fact that they're trans that's leading to these murders. It's the fact that they're sex workers. So, they fed me this line of bullshit and said, that's why we're taking it off. I'm sure you understand. And they offered me the use of a PR to kind of limit the damage, But I told them to fuck off, because it's outrageous.
Did they think the scene itself was offensive?
Yeah, they were saying it was promoting violence against trans people, but it's just an action-packed parody of Matrix films with the two of them fighting. Matt Berry and oh my goodness, that's terrible. I've forgotten her name. Her name's jumped out of my head. But the actress who played the trans character, it's basically, even if there had been no fight, the episode would have still been banned, because what they don't like is humor. They hate humor. They hate any thought of anyone making a joke about anything to do with trans, because trans, like the priesthood in Ireland, trans in the UK at the moment is a sacred class. Trans people are a sacred class, and you're not allowed to make fun of them. You're not allowed to criticize. You're not allowed to do anything. And because I wrote an episode where I just didn't observe any of these absurd taboos, they had to get rid of it.
Wow. So despite what might appear like a very pessimistic time from our conversation so far, I would say that 2022 has you vindicated on many fronts, and you could see it pretty positively. The Tavistock clinic, which is the NHS-run gender clinic offering sex change surgery and puberty blockers for children at the expense of the British taxpayer, has been told to close by spring next year. Elon Musk is offering a Twitter amnesty. It was supposed to be this week. You haven't yet been reinstated, but there's a good chance that you will be reinstated. And just moments ago, we learned that the Charity Commission are having a statutory inquiry into mermaids. These are all things, well, certainly Tavistock and mermaids, as well as other issues, are things that you've been calling out for years now. Do you feel vindicated?
Yeah, but I always felt vindicated in the sense that, like, I knew we were right. I knew we were right. I mean, when you think about it, a part of the NHS that gives sex change operations to children, like, how did anyone come to think that was on any level acceptable? So vindication, it's not as sweet as it should be for me, because there was never any doubt in my mind that I'd be vindicated. It's just like I'm just waiting for people to catch up. And unfortunately, even with all these advances, women are still losing their livelihoods. This ideology has kind of permeated into institutions all over the UK, disastrously, most of all, education, I think.
What's so disastrous about education?
Because it's incubating or inculcating, I'm not sure what the word is, these ideas into the next generation. And it is a form of grooming. It is a form of grooming. It's a form of ideological grooming. And children have much less of a defense against it than we grown-ups do. We're being controlled by fear and intimidation. But kids will believe anything you tell them.
What do you think needs to be done in education to fix that?
The activist teachers have to be rooted out. Activist teachers are a real problem. And also, it just has to be, one thing that really can be done, parents need to make sure that they're talking to their schools and saying, I hope you're not telling our kids that they can be born in the wrong body, or that some men are women, or whatever, So I think, again, with more awareness, with the Mermaid story breaking, becoming a bigger scandal every day, I think that there's a chance we can fight back against it. But, when you see NHS documents calling women cervix havers, or when you see NHS documents saying that our sex is assigned at birth by, a doctor who's bored, That's a real problem. And I wonder how long it's going to take to extricate it from society, really.
What's your take on mermaids? Do you think that they're salvageable as a charity, or do you think that they're too far gone and
I think the brand is dead. Unfortunate, which is actually an unfortunate thing, because before Susie Green, Mermaids was halfway sane.
What's Susie Green's role?
Susie Green was the CEO who recently resigned. But before Susie Green, Mermaids had a landing page on their website that said that most kids who have dysphoria will grow up to be gay. Most kids grow out of it. And surgical intervention is to be seen as a last resort. So they were, we would all agree with it. These are the turf positions, if you will. So these positions were completely sane. But then Susie Green came along. Susie Green is someone who, completely openly on her TED Talk, spoke about how when her child was still a toddler, her son was still a toddler, her husband didn't like the fact that he played with girls' toys. And completely openly in this TED Talk, without any further explanation, she starts describing how the kid was put on hormones and then castrated in Thailand at 16. Her 16th birthday, she brought him to Thailand and castrated him because she had convinced him, groomed him into thinking that he was actually a girl. This is a young gay kid, a young kid who would have grown up to be gay. That's what I believe she did. And I think that what happened with Mermaids is Mermaids then became an organization that acted as a kind of after the fact defense of what she did to her child. So it's Mermaids is an organization that has been poisoned by one person, then two, later on Helen Weberly came along, another one of these disgraceful doctors who was prescribing these drugs to kids. And a lot of parents who, some of whom I believe will probably end up being homophobic, some of whom are just confused and think they're doing the right thing and think that mermaids are the experts. But the whole thing was just kind of, the whole organization was transformed by Susie Green. And she has no expertise in this at all. She's an IT consultant. So I don't know, it's like the inquiry, they won't survive the inquiry. And I don't think that the brand will survive the inquiry either.
Yeah. At a recent Battle of Ideas dinner, you made a speech which people can read on your Substack, and you asked the question, how has this ideology achieved so much so quickly?
Well, basically what you found with the internet was a way that people could escape their individual echo chambers and speak to others. So you had a number of different echo chambers online. You had young kids who were self-diagnosing on Tumblr. You had academics who were forming what you might call a false body of knowledge in postmodern thought and queer theory. You had predators who were looking for victims. And you had grifters who were sensing an opportunity. And all these people online, they formed a giant bubble that also, unfortunately, brought in people from the media, publishing, theater, even therapy. And they formed a false consensus based on, as I say, these kind of repeated thought-terminating cliches, like wrong side of history, but also intimidation and threats of cancellation if you disagreed with any of it. So, the Twitter just enabled the pylons, and it enabled the bullying, and it enabled the concerted letter writing campaigns and all this type of thing. Actually, I have a theory that another reason we are where we are is because of spell check. Because now lunatics, you can't really tell they're lunatics because they've run their letters through spell check.
Because, of course, before we could tell immediately
you go,
from
this
the
guy, we don't need to take him seriously. But now everything is impeccably spelled. You know, so I think in many ways, spell check has brought about, you know, the end of the Western world. But you know, it's been a perfect storm of stupidity and cowardice and groupthink and all these things, and it would not have been possible, I think, without the internet. You know,
when does this end for you? When are you going to be able to get back to comedy?
Well, let me put it this way: I've already written my next show, and it's the Father Ted musical, and I'm not really interested in doing anything until that's produced. So I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to keep fighting for it. And another thing that I definitely want to do is if like the Father Ted musical was more than just a show that I felt could be written, because I never wanted to waste people's time with, like, excuse me to them, but the Sex Pistols reunion, you know, there would be nothing sadder than that. I wanted to create something that was fresh, but put the series to bed, right? We never had a proper ending to the series.
So that's what the musical is. It's the...
Yeah, I actually want to call it Father Ted, the final episode. And so, you know, but it wasn't just that for me. This was my pension. This was like the payoff. Like I don't get royalties for Father Ted. I haven't got royalties since the third time it was repeated, or third or fourth. So this was a way I had of getting a kind of a nest egg to take me into my old age, and I was very proud of it. So I'm not doing anything until that's made. You know, it's too good not to. It's too good not to let kind of die on the vine.
Well, let's hope you can have it made. And whether it's whatever production company you end up doing it, I look forward to seeing it on the stage. And so I want to ask you about Twitter. If Elon Musk follows through on his Twitter amnesty and lets you back on, how will you behave? What have you learned from being away for 2 years? You know, we were talking off camera about all of us as the world now addicted to our phones. Has there been any blessing for you that being off Twitter? How do you feel about the possibility, by the time this episode is released, you could very well be on Twitter? What does that mean to you?
Funnily enough, the activism really got a boost when I was kicked off Twitter. I went on to Substack, and since I've been kicked off, I've interviewed you know, possibly hundreds of people who've been involved in this fight. And I think it now stands as a record of these years that I'm very, very proud of. Also, the Substack has been pretty influential and pretty. It's doing very well. And I'm not sure I would have had the energy to compose, you know, proper pieces of prose if I'd been on Twitter. So it's turned me into a better writer, I think, faster writer, and a more confident one. So I think eventually, when I get back on Twitter, I guess the only thing I would ever change is I'd have more of a. You do have a lot of power. You forget how much power you have when you tweet things. So you got to be careful. The only people I now want to put on blast, as it were, which is a phrase meaning you show other people what people are up to, are these people who bully women. They're still the ones that I feel should be exposed, should be shamed, and should be should be fearing my arrival back online. You know, like, again,
exposed, yeah, shamed.
Maybe not shamed, but, like, you know, I do think, as I say, the worst thing you can do is bully a woman. I think that is really the lowest thing you can do. And, well, you know, maybe you shouldn't be shamed, but you should certainly feel shame.
I mean, there's certainly shame when it comes to the more extreme end of things. And you know, when it's trans women in prisons like Demi Minor in New Jersey, raping and impregnating other women. And I think it was earlier this week that the BBC reported on a trans woman who had sexually abused a 13 or 14-year-old girl, because that's a man abusing or raping a girl. Let's be clear about that. So those people on that side of things, those are serious issues.
And here's the thing I always argued as well. Those people aren't trans. Like, you know, I've several transsexual friends, right? They have nothing in common with these people. And yet, like, J.K. Rowling got into trouble for misgendering a man who raped and killed a 13-year-old girl, you know?
When was that?
It was just a few days ago. It's like he's got a fucking scorpion tattoo on his face.
Wow.
And these criminals are just playing people for fools. And these middle-class morons are going along with it.
Yeah.
You know? So you know, I don't want to shame anyone, but I certainly want to hold up a mirror to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And to show them this is what you support, this is who you've become.
Yeah. Well, you showed me the lesbian dating app. Is it called Her?
Yeah.
Which you went on self-IDing as a woman with a rather amusing photograph, I should say. But you showed me the other men self-IDing as women who are on the app.
Yeah.
And there's not, some of them aren't even attempting to look like women.
Not at all.
And they're just creeps.
They're just creeps. And not just that, but if a lesbian complains that these obvious men are on their app, the lesbian will be thrown off. So for people like Graham Norton to know all this and to, you know, not condemn it, I don't know how he can sleep at night.
Well, you worked with Graham Norton on Father Ted, and Father Ted, I think, was his, not his starting point, but certainly was a big boost in his early career. How do you feel about him saying that cancel culture doesn't exist and it's actually accountability culture?
Well, what am I being held accountable for? What have I done except defend women's rights, tried to stop people from trolling lesbians on their own apps, you know, objected to the medicalization and the experimentation on children? What have I done? Why am I being held accountable? You know? And the reason is the same reason as J.K. Rowling. No reason. There's no reason. I just refused to accept a completely incoherent ideology, you know?
Well, Graham, where does it end for you? Is there something that you, because this could be an eternal battle. This could be there's always new things coming up. At what point do you feel like you'll have achieved what you need to achieve in this fight?
I think Mermaids closing will be a huge vindication, as you say. But in general, I don't think this is a fight we should ever stop, because really what we're doing is manning the barricades against whatever weirdness the internet throws at us next. You know, this was like, I always think that if the satanic panic, which was contained to a few states in the American Midwest, if the internet had existed at that time, who knows what damage the satanic panic might have done. This ideology is a good example of what happens when a crazy idea escapes a few crazy bubbles and takes over the world. And we really need to be on our guard now. Now that we're living with the internet, it's too convenient for us to get rid of it. So we have to be on our guard against these kinds of threats. So I'm hoping that all the trauma we've been through, me and all the women I support who've lost livelihoods and relationships and friendships and family members, I'm hoping in the end that it will act as a lesson for the future, you know, because we can't let it happen again. We can't let it happen to such an extent that children are hurt, you know?
Yeah. Well, on that note, Graham Linehan, it's been my pleasure to speak with you and an honor, and I really think you're an incredibly brave man.
Oh, cheers, thank you. I really appreciate
it. What you have to endure to defend women has been absolutely appalling, and I wish you all the best moving forward, and thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you.